The first lie was small enough to fit on a square of paper. Be back by midnight. It sat on the kitchen table like a feather that insisted on being a stone, its casual slant a shrug tossed into a still room. And Luke, who collected quiet the way some men collect coins, stood there with the note between two fingers as if it might chirp and tell him how to carry it without bruising. The flat they rented wore the hour in its skin. Refrigerator hum, neighbor's television leaking laughter through the wall, the tap's shy drip. And Luke let those sounds climb onto him like a blanket while the clock on the oven blinked 10:03 in a gentle, relentless pulse. He should have been used to this by now. Penelope's restlessness lifting the door off its hinges, the promise of night tugging at her like a draft under a poorly sealed window. But habit doesn't make a wound hurt less. It teaches you where to hold your body so the ache won't shout. He washed 2 plates though he'd eaten alone, then lined them on the rack like arguments he didn't want to have, and sank into the dent his body had taught the couch to keep. Familiar saved him. The steady beat of a desk fan, the way the lamplight pooled golden on the rug's worn threads, his grocery list folded in the coffee table drawer where, years ago, love notes had lived. He had once followed Penelope into rooms that were too bright and too loud for him, parties where windows sweated and conversations frayed into laughter, rooftops where wind braided her hair into a crown, and called it a compromise because marriage is made of such bargains. His quiet offered up in exchange for the sparkle in her eyes when the music found her. It had worked until it didn't, until their differences thickened into the shape of who they were when the performative hours were over. Penelope stopped asking, Luke stopped pretending. The notes started appearing like weather reports, going to ashes. Dinner at the little place with the neon sign, might stop by the club. Tonight at 11:52 his phone vibrated. He saw her name, Penelope, no emoji, her choice to leave the name clean like a glass that shows its fingerprints, and swiped. Hey, he said, keeping his voice arranged into calm. The thrum of bass rushed through the speaker, a physical thing, a heartbeat with dyed hair. Voices rose and fell behind her, distant shouts, a burst of laughter like a shaken soda. You're still at the cafe? He asked, though he knew the answer. Cafes don't have strobe lights. We came here, she called over the music. I needed to dance. Needed, as if the urge were a hunger that reasonable people wouldn't deny. What time do you think you'll be back? He asked, trying to put reasonable on the table like bread, not like a leash. Soon, she said, breathless laughter in the word. Don't wait up. And then she was gone, the line returned to its factory setting, the emptiness that lives in wires. He fell asleep the way men do when they have no training in it, on the couch, shoes on, neck at a cruel angle, the remote calling out to his hip bone. The dream he had was shapeless, only a taste in the mouth upon waking, metallic, like pennies sucked by a child. The ceiling was a dark lid, his phone face down a scold on the table. The oven clock blinked 2:41, a number with a whistle in it. He called. It rang and softened into a voicemail that sounded like her, except not at all like her because machines imitate without memory. He waited, then tried again. 3:06 was meaner. 3:31 made him stand, stretch the kink out of his back until his shoulder popped like a knuckle. When the lock clicked at 3:59, he found he was braced for a storm as if the door might open and wind would come through with teeth. But Penelope walked in as if the air belonged to her, hair smooth, eyeliner unsmudged. A coat he'd told her was impractical because of the white, and it was still white. She toed off her heels delicately, lined them next to the mat like obedient animals, and smiled, not guilty, not nervous, not contrite, just tired and alive. I'm sorry, she said, and the word felt like an item on a receipt, paid without looking at the price. Lost track of time. She crossed to him, pressed a kiss to his cheek, cool and perfumed, and the contact dissolved what he'd rehearsed. Let's go to bed, she murmured, the gentleness a key that fit locks he didn't realize he'd kept oiled. He nodded, like a man led by the elbow back to a table after he has stood to leave and forgotten which way the exit was. Morning climbed in under the blinds, thinning the bedroom into something fragile and bright. Penelope slept on her side, mouth softened by dreams, The corner of her lip tilted upward as if something pleasant had found her in the dark and stayed. Luke watched the small tide at her ribs climb and fall, the way hair splayed against the pillow like ink in water. He could carry anger, he knew, if someone handed it to him and said, "Hold this until noon." But left alone, it evaporated. He preferred forgiveness because it made rooms easier to live in. He rose quietly and padded to the kitchen, set water to boil, opened the drawer where the grocery list lived. Beach, he wrote at the top, underlined it twice, felt giddy at the thought of salt air and a horizon wide enough to make them both small. When she wandered in, yawning prettily, he said, "When are we heading to the beach?" And she smiled as if the word itself were an ice cube drawing a trail on her sun-warmed skin. "Soon," she said, and he didn't see how the word echoed the one from the night before. What he did see, over the next week, was light flickering on the screen of her phone like fish surfacing and vanishing. It buzzed when she was near, and she would flip it, screen down, with a deftness that looked practiced. Once, when she went to shower, he padded in sock feet to the coffee table where it lay and woke it with a thumb that didn't know its place. Notifications had been swept away like footprints smoothed by a wave. The message app opened onto a clean page. The clean was what made him dizzy. He closed it. He told himself stories about work group chats and girlfriends sharing memes and a world that has trained all of us to be addicted to rectangles. At dinner, when his phone buzzed, he left it face up. "Spam," he said, and she laughed, and maybe that was why he didn't ask the thing that was chewing at his throat. "Who is it?" Friday arrived with a cerulean sky that made the city look like someone had scrubbed it. Penelope stood at the mirror inserting earrings that grazed her jaw, slid her feet into a pair of heels that elongated her into a promise. "Out with the girls," she sang at the doorway, swiping gloss across her mouth with a flourish. He nodded from the couch, blanket tucked around his legs as if he were hiding in autumn. "Have fun," he said, neutrality arranged neatly on the coffee table between them. She left a note anyway, and it lay there, foolish and necessary. Back late, he followed, not because he wanted to be right, but because he wanted to stop being wrong in his own house. The club's exterior had a line of faces lit by their own hope, breath-making clouds under the neon sign, bouncers in black checkpointing joy with stamps and nods. Inside, the room was a lung. Bass pushed and pulled the bodies into shape. Lights sliced the smoky air into wet paper ribbons. The bar shone like a river, reflected faces briefly embedded in the shine before the current washed them away. Scent layered on scent. Citrus peel crushed under ice, sugar burning in the heat of liquor, perfume that had teeth, the plain human note of sweat. Luke kept to the edges, a stone skirting the river's wild. He found a corner where he could see the dance floor and let the darkness do the work of making him a spectator. Penelope arrived with friends who did not walk so much as glitter. They claimed a high table, laughed with the bright, knife-like joy of people who love the sound of their names in a loud room. She was luminous. That was the only word he could bear. She danced the way she used to in the kitchen to old songs on the radio. But here she let the beat inhabit her spine, shoulders translating the rhythm into a language the whole room spoke. One friend pressed herself against a stranger, their movements becoming a single shape. Luke frowned and lifted his phone, a reflex that felt ugly even as he obeyed it. He recorded, evidence for no court in particular. The stage rose like an island from the sea of heads, makeshift, a platform dressed in light. The room shifted as if something large had entered, and then it had. A troupe of dancers with bodies cut clean by practice and the kind of attention that becomes its own diet. The central figure wore dark sunglasses indoors and carried himself like a room had decided to stand up and follow him. The performance was part sin, part sport, all precision, movement like a tide that only came in. The crowd cheered and opened for it the way water parts for the prow of a boat. Luke watched Penelope watch. Her face turned toward the man as if he were a moon, and she a planet that had finally found its orbit. Admiration stitched across her features, something hungrier flashed, then hid. Jealousy isn't a color, it's a temperature change. Luke felt the room go a degree colder. When the music shivered into its final pose and applause burst, Penelope leaned into her friends, whispered something that set off their shrieks. She smoothed her dress like she was flattening the air, lifted her chin, and walked toward the service corridor, a curtain guarding that thin border between audience and backstage. Her friends whooped. Luke stood so fast his chair's feet barked against the floor. He slipped along the wall, cut across the current, and intercepted Lillian near the restroom, her laughter slackening when she saw his face. "Stop," he said, and his own voice startled him, flat, cold, as if someone else had borrowed his throat. She blinked, mascaraed lashes a nervous metronome. "Luke, hey," she started, and he lifted his phone before she could reach for excuses. He played the clip, the sway on the dance floor, the man's hands, the push-ups a stranger did to impress, everyone watching. "Let's jog your memory," he said, the sarcasm cheap but necessary, like a tourniquet. Lillian's face folded. Apologies leapt to her eyes and then, wisely, died there. "She met him before," she said, so soft it made the words mean more. "There were sparks," she said. She stopped. "I thought she'd tell you." He didn't say anything because the next thing after silence would have been begging for another detail he didn't have the muscles to carry. The truth sat in his stomach like a coin swallowed by a child. He could feel its edge whenever he moved. He left the club without trying to see beyond the curtain, without making another recording, without playing out a scene in which he caught her and she lied, and he produced evidence, and she cried and everyone watched. Outside, night licked rain from the pavement, and his breath looked like he was already telling this to someone else. He walked home and did the smallest, bravest thing he knew. He opened a suitcase and put his life inside in careful stacks. He packed the beach clothes he'd bought, the ones still smelling faintly of new dye and disappointment, and he added the envelope of cash that had been slowly growing in the back of the wardrobe. Their ocean, their air, their future deck chairs. He looked around the flat and thought of the dent in the couch, the map his body had made there, the grocery list in the drawer. He folded the list into his pocket because habit can be an anchor and a sail. He texted his landlord. He found a small apartment near his office with windows that faced east, a place where morning could teach him how to start. When Penelope called, her voice made soft by guilt and performance, he listened and said little. "It's not what you think," she told him, and he believed that what he thought was already too simple to match whatever mess she had conjured, but the simplicity was what he wanted. "We can talk," she said. "We can fix it." He filed the papers for divorce with a steadiness that surprised him, his signature a line that looked like someone else's courage. Before he turned his phone off for the night in the new place with its unscuffed floor and echoing rooms, he sent the video to Nathan, her brother, with a message that contained no adjectives. Nathan responded with one word, "Done," and within a day Penelope was sleeping on Lillian's couch, the white coat slung over a chair like a flag that had never been hers. End of part 1. If desired, proceed with part 2 of 3, about 1,000 words. The aftermath of Luke's departure, Penelope's attempts at rationalization, the hollowed glow of nightlife, and Luke's tentative rebuilding, with charged scenes in the club's smoky margins and quiet mornings in the new flat. The new apartment greeted Luke with an echo. Sound had edges here, unsoftened by drapes or rugs, every step a small announcement, every cupboard a proclamation when opened. He set his duffel on the floor and stood in the doorway for a long breath, as if he were waiting for the place to decide whether it would take him. Morning lived on the eastern windowsills like a tame animal, light pawed at the bare walls, testing them. The radiator hiccuped once, then sighed, as if even it were relieved that someone had arrived to remind it of its purpose. He unzipped the bag and began the ritual of making a life from what fit into a car's trunk. 2 plates, 2 mugs, a skillet he trusted. The grocery list, folded to a softness that spoke of years, slid onto the small counter and lay there like a friend who did not ask questions. He wrote, eggs, coffee, bread, apples. His pen hesitated, hovered above the paper, then struck a line through beach. It was both petty and necessary, a surgery on a list that had briefly promised paradise. He slept in a bed that did not yet know him, sheets cool and crisp as hotel linen. Silence pressed close, companionable at first, then too intimate. He found a podcast about the history of bread to keep him company as he ate toast, the narrator's gentle enthusiasm filling the room with facts about yeast and patience. He walked to work in the pallor of early, past a florist uncrating buckets of peonies, a bakery exhaling sugar, a dog who decided Luke was worth a sniff and possibly a blessing. The first call came at lunch. Penelope's name trembled across the screen like something fragile suspended over a floor. He let it go to voicemail and listened with his thumb on the pause. "Luke," she said, and the sound of his name in her mouth entered the room and leaned against the wall, sulking. "Please call me." He didn't, not then. The second message came with tears braided into the words. The third was anger in a dress that didn't fit. By the fourth, she had collected herself into calm. "I'll explain everything," she promised. As if explanations were a form of currency he might accept once properly counted into his hand. He chose not to shop at their old grocery, where the cashier with the silver ring in her eyebrow would look up and ask, "Where's your other half?" He learned instead the aisles of a different store, the paths that led to the decent tomatoes, the secret of the quiet checkout with the teenager who did not speak, and therefore did not accidentally bruise the fruit while rearranging it into an aesthetic still life. He developed a small, brave routine. Laundry on Thursdays, floor swept on Sundays, plants watered whenever their leaves turned their mouths down as if scolding him. At night, he unpacked memories out of nowhere. Penelope, gleaming on rooftops, her hair tangled by the wind until it looked like weather. Penelope in a grocery aisle, humming to the canned beans as if she had rescued them from some dreary fate and was returning them to glory. Penelope's hand sleeping next to his, both of them forgetting to hold on in the middle of the night and then finding each other again without waking. These images didn't so much ache as thrum, the way a bruise does when you bump it on the edge of a table you didn't see. He let the pictures pass. He did not invite them to sit down. On a Wednesday, Nathan called. The message was short, utilitarian. "I threw her out." Luke pressed the phone to his ear a second longer after the line went dead, as if there might be more, a footnote, a kindness. There wasn't. He did not feel vindicated. He felt like a person standing on a shore watching a storm dismantle a house and realizing that, yes, the wind had always favored that angle of attack, and yes, the scaffolding had been wrong from the start, and also someone lived there. Penelope landed on Lillian's couch as glitter lands after a party. A residue, a reminder, a nuisance that looks beautiful until you're tired of finding it everywhere. She texted a photo of her feet crossed at the ankle on a coffee table, toes painted a defiant coral, and beneath it wrote, "I'm okay." Luke did not reply because he did not know if she was lying or if she had found a different definition for okay, one that did not require him. Lillian called that Friday. "She's a mess," she said in a hiss that wanted to be a whisper. "She's also not a mess." The contradiction hung between them like a mobile spinning lazily. She says you overreacted, then she says she's sorry, then she says none of this is her fault. Then she cries because your radiator used to make a bird noise and she misses it. Silence hummed. "I shouldn't be calling," Lillian added, "but I thought you should know she's still going out. Says it helps. Says she can't breathe otherwise." Luke imagined the nightclub's light slicing her into strips and reassembling her into something that looked like Penelope if you were drunk enough. "Thank you," he said, because the politeness muscle did not atrophy just because a marriage did. On Saturday, he took the train 2 stops too far and walked back home along the river. The city used the water like a mirror it checked itself in and then forgot. Teenagers practiced choreography under a bridge, all elbows and earnestness. A man argued with his reflection and lost. A little girl sailed a leaf boat from one puddle to the next, narrating its adventures in a cadence that suggested danger and rescue and snack time. Luke sat on a bench that didn't look like a metaphor until he thought about it, and decided everything looked like a metaphor if you stared at it long enough. His phone buzzed again. He almost didn't look. He did. A message, "Can we meet? Just talk. 1 coffee. I'll come to you." He could feel somehow the effort inside the sentence, the way she had made words wear shoes they didn't like. He typed, 2 p.m. corner table Grafton Cafe. He did not add a please. He did not add a smile. She arrived smelling like peppermints and a decision. She looked as she always had, too alive for the room, but less so now, a candle that had been burned down and was trying to remember its shape. Her eyes were rimmed and tired. She sat, folded her hands, unfolded them, glanced back toward the door as if an audience might be waiting to correct her lines if she misspoke. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For this," she gestured, meaning the table, the chair, the afternoon. The waiter hovered. "Americano," Luke said. "Espresso," Penelope added, and her voice didn't tremble. He admired the steadiness, the way one admires a bridge without inquiring as to its maintenance schedule. "I didn't sleep with him," she said, like a cork popped too soon. The sentence landed and rolled toward him. He did not pick it up. "But you," he let the but sprawl, lazy and accusatory. She winced. "I met him before, at the club. We talked. It felt—" She stared down at the spoon, polished, waiting. "It felt like a room with open windows. Like air. And life with me felt like what?" he asked, and the question emerged clean, without thorns. She lifted her gaze. For a second he saw everything that had been true between them flicker across her face like birds in a tree. "Like a room with a door that didn't always open when I pressed the handle," she said, and the unkindness of it was mitigated by how precisely it fit. "I tried to become a person who didn't need windows," she whispered. "I thought that was love. And I thought staying home with you was cowardice," he said. "I thought following you was heroism. I didn't know it was acting." They sat with that. Coffee arrived. Cups touched the table and made little commas in the conversation. He watched the crema collapse, a golden geography giving way to flat black. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the lying. She made a small helpless circle over the table as if stirring something that needed dissolving. "I don't know how to do it," she admitted. "Choose." "You did," he said, gentler than he intended. "You chose the motion. I chose the stillness. We pretended not to notice." She flinched, not offended but pierced. "Could we try again?" The words were not a plea. They were a hypothesis arriving for peer review. He looked at the woman he had married and found that he could love her and also decline. "I don't think I have another again," he said. "I think what I have left needs to be used once." Her lip trembled, and she smoothed it with her thumb as if it were lipstick and not grief. She nodded, a small, brave act that looked like someone practicing for a future where nodding would be necessary. They finished their coffees. Outside, the wind that lives between buildings tried on different speeds. At the door she said, "I did love you." "I know," he replied, and the knowledge did not save anything, but it did not ruin anything either. She hesitated, then reached to adjust the lapel of his coat, habit, tenderness, choreography, and then stopped herself, a mercy. "Take care, Luke," she said. He watched her walk away into a city that kept pretending to be new for the sake of people like her. Nights began to stitch themselves into something that bore weight. Luke learned his radiator's hiccups, his floor's protest, his kettle's happy whistle. He cooked a meal that was not simply fuel, garlic softened in olive oil, tomatoes collapsing into sweetness, basil torn like paper, and ate it at the small table by the window, the city's lights arranging themselves into constellations that didn't exist anywhere but here. He did not cry when a song he and Penelope had once danced to in socks in their old kitchen came on the radio. He turned it up and listened for the part where the drummer always arrived a half beat early, because even perfection needs a flaw to hold on to. On a restless Thursday, he took a late walk past the old club. The line was shorter, the neon less smug. He wondered if the dancer still moved the way gravity loves to watch, if the curtain still hid the same thin promise, that there is always something behind the barrier, and that it will be different enough to make you stay. He turned his back on the door before it could decide whether to recognize him. Penelope tried to live inside the nights as if they were houses with good plumbing and ample light. She and Lillian slipped into rooms that smelled like spilled sugar and regret, played at being the women they had been 2 years ago, and found the seams showed. On a couch at 2 a.m., Penelope watched couples tilt toward each other like plants to a window, and felt the ache begin as a murmur, and then become a hymn she couldn't sing. She danced until her legs threatened mutiny, then sat in the bathroom stall with her head in her hands while a stranger in glitter shoes asked if she was okay. Yes, she lied, and then added, no, because the lie felt lonely without company. She texted Luke once more. Not can we talk, but thank you for the coffee. He stared at the screen and typed, take care. He meant it the way people mean it when they stand at the door of a house where they once slept and now do not, hands in pockets, eyes finding anything they can name to avoid naming what they have lost. He hit send and felt something unspool inside, not a thread breaking, but a knot learning it could loosen. At work, a colleague invited him to trivia night. He said yes because the word felt like a muscle he needed to exercise. He did not speak much. He answered questions about capital cities and quietly excelled at the music round. Someone laughed at a joke he made, small and dry, and he recognized in himself a man who could be liked for reasons that had nothing to do with his ability to forgive. On Sunday, he bought a plant with thick leaves and a confidence he envied. The tag advised bright, indirect light and the kind of attention that doesn't fuss. He set it on the eastern windowsill and promised it nothing he couldn't give. He wrote a new list: lemons, rice, lentils, parsley. At the bottom, in smaller letters, he added, breathe. When evening softened the edges of the buildings, he called his parents. His mother answered with her name, as if someone might mistake her for a stranger if she didn't declare herself. They spoke about the weather, his father's war with the squirrels, a cousin's impending baby. You sound good, his mother said, and he could hear in her voice the careful happiness of someone approaching a skittish deer with an apple. I'm okay, he said, and the word fit better than it had 3 days ago. After he hung up, he stood at the window and watched the city settle. A party on a nearby rooftop traded laughter with the sky. Somewhere, a siren wailed, not angry, just busy. His kettle clicked. He moved toward it, not hurrying, already knowing where the mugs lived. There is a particular quiet that follows a song ending in a crowded room, a hush that isn't silence so much as the echo of sound remembering itself. Penelope learned to live in that quiet. It followed her home from nights that once felt like oxygen and now lay across her shoulders like a damp coat. She would step out of a club's hot breath into the alley's cooler exhale, and the glitter still clinging to her collarbone would feel like a cruel joke, the residue of someone else's celebration. Lillian would hail a ride with the urgency of a person who had practiced rescuing, and they'd collapse into the back seat, shoes in hand, laughing at nothing, at everything. At home, the couch had a dent where Penelope's body made a nightly apology. Sleep would come only after the ceiling had been named, cracked in the corner. The window had been counted, 1, 2, 3 smudges, and regret had been given its ration of thought, enough, but never enough. In the daytime, she tried to turn the story into one she could stand hearing. We were mismatched, she'd say to the mirror, to Lillian spooning cereal, to Nathan, who had run out of rooms in which to forgive. He wanted small. I wanted big. She would list all the places they had met in the middle, the time he brought a novel to a rooftop party and stayed and learned to name the cocktails, the time she said no to a festival and yes to his couch, and a stew that tasted like patience. The lists did not settle anything. Memory is not a judge, it's a choir. It sings both sides until the air is too full to breathe. Once she walked by the old flat and saw through the window the lamp they had found at a flea market, a brass stem, shade like a soft hat, casting its fairy yellow on the wall. It looked smaller now, or maybe she had grown farther from it than she knew was possible. She texted Luke, almost without thinking. The lamp always looked better at dusk. An hour later his reply arrived. It still does. She put the phone face down and slid it away as if it were a plate she couldn't trust herself to finish. She went to work and did her job with the ferocity of a person who needed the 7 hours to be a dam holding back the other 17. She said yes to extra shifts, no to drinks afterward, yes to spreadsheets, no to the quiet that waited behind her door. When colleagues asked how she was fine. in a tone that dared them to argue. At lunch, she ate standing up, counting bites like a penance, as if nourishment could be ordered to behave. On a Wednesday softened by rain, she ran into a woman from the old cafe where she and Luke used to linger on Sundays, the woman whose hair always looked like it had recently forgiven a curling iron. "You're Penelope," the woman said, as if opening a drawer and finding a shirt she hadn't worn in years. "How are you?" Penelope startled at the question's old-fashioned sincerity. "Good," she lied. The woman's eyes did not blink. "Sometimes the song ends," she said gently. "You can still like the band." Penelope laughed, a little bark of sound. "I broke the drum kit," she admitted. The woman shrugged, reapplied a lipstick the color of fearless, and said, "Then maybe you learn to sing." That night she did not go out. She cooked pasta in a pot that had a dent, added butter and pepper and grief, and ate it on the floor, leaning against the cabinet. The apartment's hum changed its tune, turned companion rather than reprimand. She opened her phone and scrolled through photos taken in motion, blurred faces, the colors of light without the shapes. She stopped at one. Luke at the beach they had never reached, a quick shot she'd taken off a travel blog for a packing checklist, his face imagined over a horizon that did not belong to them. She held the fiction like a seashell to her ear and listened to the invented ocean. It did not help. It did not hurt. It just was. The city's nights continued their work without her. Lights rose and fell, bass built and broke. The bouncers learned new names. The dancers moved through their rotations like planets, faithful to their gravity. When she went back, months later, not as a resident but as a tourist in a country she'd once claimed, she noticed everything she had once ignored. The bartender with the tired smile polishing the same glass for 5 minutes, the server's shoe tapping out an anxious Morse code, the couple in the corner who were not beautiful but who made each other beautiful by looking. She danced once, a small circle of self, and then sat down, palms flat on the table, waiting to hear if the music had anything left to say to her. It did not, and she did not hold it against the song. Luke's life, in its quiet way, expanded. He learned the sound his new kettle made when it was a minute from boiling, a kind warning. He found the best time to do laundry so he could use 2 machines at once and fold everything before the radios in the building synchronized to the same morning show. He bought a bike that did not try to prove anything and rode it along a path where the river reflected a sky the color of a polite conversation. He made small talk with the barista, who favored poems on the specials board. He said yes to trivia again and then again. A teammate named Ira asked if Luke wanted to try the new sandwich place across the park, and Luke said yes, and then later said maybe next week, and then a week later said yes again. This is how communities start, not with trumpets but with calendars. On a Sunday, he planted herbs in a window box, basil, mint, thyme. The soil smelled like a childhood he hadn't had. He watered them too much at first, then learned restraint, and they forgave him by not dying. The basil responded to being touched. He learned to tear it rather than cut it. He cooked a sauce so simple it almost refused to accept a name. And he ate it alone and felt not lonely, but accompanied by the steam spiraling up like a blessing. He sent a photo to his mother, who wrote back with 3 heart emojis and the instruction to add garlic next time. He added garlic next time. Nathan's texts shifted from brittle to ordinary. A photo of a carpentry project. A meme about squirrels as tiny landlords. Then once a message with no fanfare, she's in a class. Dance, but the kind where they count and name things. Says it helps. Luke typed back, I'm glad. He meant it the way you hope rain falls where it's needed. Spring unscrolled itself gently across the city. The trees rehearsed green until they were ready to perform it fully. Luke stood at his window one morning and watched a man on the sidewalk kneel to tie a little girl's shoe and then, for no reason at all, retie the other one to make them even. The tenderness of it made Luke's chest loosen. He made toast, buttered it generously, and ate it with strawberries. The jam, he decided, could wait for another day. Penelope took the dance class seriously. The first class humbled her. Mirrors do not flinch, counts do not forgive. The body keeps records too, and hers opened its ledger with a sigh. But the teacher, kind, efficient, uninterested in drama, said, "Begin where you are," and for once she did. First position. Then second. She learned to fold herself into simple shapes and to call that progress rather than proof of what she could not do. After class, she walked home with her shoes in her hand, not because they hurt, but because it felt honest to touch the ground with less between them. On a Tuesday that smelled like rain's first rumor, she saw Luke on the opposite side of the street. He carried a paper bag with the proud hunch of someone in charge of eggs. The world narrowed briefly to the thread between them. She lifted a hand, he lifted his. Traffic moved like a beast between. When the light changed, neither of them crossed. This was not a scene that needed collision. This was a nod shared across a small river. It felt like placing a stone on a grave, simple, meaningful, not an invitation to speak. They walked on. Later that week, Penelope mailed an envelope to Luke. Inside was a postcard of a beach with a horizon they did not own and a note written on the back. "I hope you found a place where the lamp still looks good at dusk. Thank you for the coffee. Thank you for the years." No signature because he would know. Luke read it at his kitchen table, next to the basil trying to be a forest. He put the card in the drawer with the batteries and the tape and the things the house depended on but rarely considered. He stood a moment longer than needed, letting the act become a small ceremony, and then went on with his evening. The final time they spoke was not in person. It was a brief call on a late afternoon stitched with errands. "The papers," she said, "signed." "Mine too," he answered. There was a pause where goodbye auditioned for a role larger than it deserved. "Take care," he said, and she smiled into the phone as if he could see the shape of the word. "You too," she said, and when the line went dead it did not feel like a door slamming. It felt like lights being turned off in a room no one slept in anymore. That night, Luke sat on the stoop with a bowl of lentils that tasted like comfort and weathered wood under him. Neighbors came and went, the building exhaled, and the sky made promises it might keep. He thought, not of the club or the note or the night on the couch with his neck bent wrong, but of the way mornings had learned him and he had learned mornings. He thought of how choosing once, with care, could be enough to rewrite the rest of a life in the small syntax of daily choosing. Across town, Penelope lay on Lillian's floor and watched the ceiling until it became a place she could imagine painting. "I'm going to find a new flat," she said aloud, the way people say a thing first to make it real for their ears. "Close to the studio," she added. Lillian from the couch made a sound that meant approval or sleep or both. Penelope opened her phone and did not open an app with a neon icon. She pulled up listings, routes to work, bus times. She let the music that drifted through the window from an upstairs apartment be only music, unclaimed, untranslatable. The night did not demand her. She did not demand it. They nodded to each other like old acquaintances who had survived a party and could, finally, go home. In the morning, the city performed its quiet miracles. Someone tied a shoe. Someone watered basil. Someone chose the window seat. Someone declined an invitation to a room where the song never ends. The music kept playing somewhere, as it always does, indifferent, generous, available. And two people who had once moved together in a small kitchen to a radio they didn't choose now moved separately through a city that kept offering them days. They took them. They did not waste them. They learned in different rooms the same choreography. How to stand still and call it dancing. How to walk away without running. How to end a song without breaking the band. How to end a song without breaking the band.